Bore da. Bore da a chroeso I webinar Comisiynydd Pobl Hŷn Cymru. Cyflwr y Genedl 2021. Mae'n wych gweld bod gymaint ohonoch chi wedi gallu ymuno gyda ni heddiw. Ac i'r rhai ohonoch chi sydd yn trydar, ein hasnod yw hasnod Cyflwr y Genedl 2021. Cyn I ni gychwyn, hoffwn I dynnu sylw at rai o nodweddion Zoom y byddwn ni'n defnyddio heddiw yn ystod y webinar. Yn gyntaf ar waelod y sgrin, fe welwch chi fotwm Q&A, cwestiwn ac ateb, sydd i'w gael ar weld eich sgrin. A drwy glicio ar hwn, gallwch sgwennu unrhyw gwestiwn sydd gennych wrth i'r Comisiynydd gyflwyno'r adroddiad, a beth chi'n ceisio ateb gymaint ohonynt â phosib ar ddiwedd y cyflwyniad. Bydd cyfle hefyd ymhellach ymlaen I ofyn cwestiynau i'r panel cyfan yn ystod y sesiwn holi ag ateb am tua 11 o gloch. A mi fyddwn ni'n esbonio hwnnw eto bellach ymlaen. Mae croeso I chi ofyn eich cwestiwn yn Gymraeg neu yn Saesneg. Ac os ydych chi am gael cyfieithiad o'r cwestiwn, yna mae gofyn I chi fynd I lawr I waelod y sgrin unwaith eto, at yr arwydd Interpretation, a clicio ar English I chi gael y cyfieithiad o'r cwestiwn Cymraeg i'r Saesneg. Yr ail nodwedd hoffwn I sôn amdano fo yw y botwm chat sydd eto ar waelod y sgrin nesa at y botwm cwestiwn ag ateb. Gallwch chi ddefnyddio hwn I rannu eich barn neu wneud sylw ar yr hyn ydych chi'n glywed wrth I ni fynd ymlaen trwy'r webinar. Wedyn I roi sylw ydy bydd pawb yn y webinar yn gallu gweld y chat ac ymateb i'ch sylwadau chi, yn union fel petai o'n sgwrs agored. Hefyd, mae'r webinar yn cael ei recordio yn fyw a bydd ar gael yn cael ei ffrydio yn fyw ar ein sianel YouTube. Felly, heb rhagor o oedi, hoffwn I wahodd y Comisiynydd, Helena Hurklots, I agor y webinar yn ffurfiol. Helena.
Diolch, George. Boda, good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to this webinar on the International Day of Older Persons. And it's great to have so many of you with us, joining us today. Over the last 18 months, I've had the privilege of talking to many older people across Wales, mainly on Zoom. And today we're bringing some of that engagement, that learning, older people's voices, together with the data and evidence that we've been gathering to see how the older people have changed. Now, it's been a very challenging 18 months for all of us. And some of the things I'm going to be drawing on when I talk today will be the work we did over the course of the last 18 months to listen to the voices of older people living in care homes, their families and people working there. And last year, we produced our Care Home Voices report, which set out what people were going through and what needed to change. I'll also be drawing on our Leave No One Behind report, which set out how older people were feeling through the pandemic and the action needed to make sure that older people aren't left behind as we transition through the next stages. And finally, today, I'm going to be drawing on our Winter Stories report, which we published today alongside our State of the Nation report. And I'd like to thank the older people who, over the winter, shared their experiences with us, the strategies they had to keep well, how they felt about lockdown, how they felt about missing friends and family. So I hope you're going to really enjoy today's event, and we'll post your questions throughout the course of the event. And later, I'm going to be joined by a cross-party panel to debate the findings of the report and what should happen next. So in a moment, I'm just going to share some slides with you and start sharing what we found in our State of the Nation report. So I'm going to start with digital inclusion. And the reason for that is that today's International Day of Older Person is about digital equity. The theme for this year is digital equity. And we all know, don't we, how much we've relied on digital technology to stay in touch with people, to find out what's happening, and to access services. But this shows the real challenge that's still there with older people accessing the internet. So as you can see, for people between the age of 16 to 44, nearly everyone is accessing the internet, 98%. But that drops dramatically, so that by the age of 75 and over, only 40% of people are accessing the internet. And we know how important it's been during the pandemic to be able to shop online, to access banking and other things. But again, for people over 65, that's much less frequent. And significantly, we know that now only 23% of older people find it easy to access health services online. And we all know that because of the pressures of the pandemic, more and more of our services are moving online. But there's a challenge here to make sure that older people aren't disadvantaged as a result. So this is one of the reasons why in the next few weeks, I'm going to be publishing guidance to health boards and local authorities to remind them of their responsibilities, both to help ensure that older people can access their services online by supporting them to learn how to get online, but also making sure that if people are not digitally connected, they're not disadvantaged and can still access things another way, by telephone, for example. So a huge amount still to do on the issue of digital inclusion for older people. I turn now to the issues of health and care and well-being. And we know, for all of us really, how much our health and well-being has been affected. But this is particularly true of older people. And that's meant that people have lost some of the physical and mental health that kept them going before the pandemic. So for example, from the evidence from Age UK, we know across the UK, 42% of people over the age of 60 now find it more difficult to walk up and down stairs, to walk short distances. And we also know from our own survey that 17% of older people said they needed mental health support in the last 12 months. And 82% of people affected by dementia said their symptoms have increased. So there's a significant challenge ahead for our health services, our care services, our voluntary and community organisations, and our local community groups to reach out to older people and to make sure we're doing all we can to enable people to rebuild and regain their physical and mental health. And I've been working with Age Cymru, with the Welsh Council for Voluntary Action and others to put proposals forward to Welsh Government for significant investment, particularly in the voluntary and community sector, to be able to reach those people who desperately need that health support, but also desperately need support with their mental health as well. And we also found through our work that 91,000 older people in Wales are now consistently lonely. So there's not a passing loneliness. This is something that is deep-rooted and long-lasting. And that can be very difficult to break out of, but it also can be incredibly damaging for one's health and well-being. So it just shows the urgency of action to reach out to people who are feeling lonely. Now, many of you will know that one of my priorities as Commissioner is to work to stop the abuse of older people. And we know that 1 in 5 older people experience some form of abuse. So in Wales, that's around 170,000 older people. I've been really encouraged by the work I've been doing with over 30 organisations across Wales, including the police forces, the NHS social care, specialist advice organisations and domestic abuse organisations. And we've been doing a huge amount to raise awareness of abuse, to let older people know where to get help and support, and to start getting the evidence that for too long has been missing. And just as an example, at the moment, the England and Wales Crime Survey does not collect data on older people over the age of 74 who experience domestic abuse. It's as if they're invisible. Now, because of our efforts and the efforts of other organisations, that's going to change. And by 2023, we will begin to get evidence of all ages, of older people who experience abuse. So it just shows not just the importance of the data that's there, but the importance of understanding where the gaps in data are and making sure that those are filled so that we get the evidence that's needed. Now, in the polling we did for our State of the Nation report, some of the findings I found truly shocking. And the next one is one of these, which is that only 59% of older people felt like a valued member of society since the start of the pandemic. Now, there are many reasons for this, and we might want to debate some of them later. But we know that ageist language in the media and the press can make you feel that you don't count, that you're not worth. And I've also found from discussions with older people over the last 18 months, people have said they felt invisible. They said they felt that they weren't worth as much as other citizens. And this is surely a key area for us to challenge. We must make sure that everyone of every age feels valued. Because if you don't feel valued, you too easily get left behind. You too easily suffer from mental health problems. So moving on now to look at the services that are there for us when we need help. And here's just some of the data that indicates a health service under pressure, but also the difficulty of older people accessing it. So 41%, for example, of people had difficulty accessing a convenient GP appointment. The data on dental access shows very, very low numbers of older people getting dentist appointments over the last year or so. And also the increase, a significant increase in telephone appointments. Now, telephone appointments can work for some people, but not for everyone. If you have a hearing impairment, if you have cognitive difficulties, dealing with triaging over the telephone can be very difficult. So while we understand the pressures that have been on our health services in particular and the need to find different ways of accessing services, we now need to make sure that significant work is undertaken to make sure that older people are not disadvantaged and that they can access the health services that they need in a way that most suits them, so they get the health care when and when they need it. I'm going to turn now to focus really on some of the contributions that older people make in our society, and particularly to start with in employment. So 35% of the Welsh workforce are now over 50. 71,000 people over the age of 65 are employment. So it's really significant, the contribution that we make in the workforce as we age, but the importance of it as a key part of our economy. However, we found that unemployment has risen by 55% during the pandemic amongst people aged 50 to 64. And this is the largest relative increase of all age groups. Now, shockingly, only 35% of employers would be prepared to hire and offer training to someone over the age of 55 in a new industry. This is a clear example of ageism and age discrimination, which denies older people the opportunity to continue working, but also is a negative impact in terms of the economy. It's very clear that we're going to need older people in the workforce in order to come out of this recession and this pandemic successfully. So we must challenge age discrimination in employment, and we must make sure that we have access to training and support as we get older. Now, our voluntary groups and voluntary services depend massively on older people. And this chart shows you the percentage of older people who volunteer. And the blue bar, that's 2017 to 18, and the orange one is 2019 to 2020. So the first thing that strikes you is how many thousands of older people volunteer. 36% of people in 2017 to 18 between the ages of 65 and 74. And over 75, over a quarter of people over 75 volunteer. That's fantastic news and just shows the contribution we make as we get older. But you can see the decline. And we don't yet have the data for 20 to 21, but we're expecting to see that would decline still further. And the reasons we know: because of lockdown, because of shielding, because of anxiety about getting out. But we must make sure that in all the planning that's done to come through the pandemic, we enable people to safely volunteer again. Our voluntary organisations are desperate for that support, and we know the well-being benefits that come with volunteering. Now, some of the most heartbreaking conversations I've had with older people over the last 18 months have been with people who are caring for others, unpaid carers. And work by Carers Wales and others has shown the significant increase in the numbers of people who've begun caring for a loved one during the pandemic. 196,000 more people, 17% of whom are over the age of 65. But we've also seen the toll that that's taking. 80% of carers now providing more care, and 76% who are exhausted or worn out. And that's certainly what I've heard from carers. I remember talking to Margaret, who's caring for her husband with dementia, who talked about how their independence at the beginning of the pandemic was taken away in a heartbeat, where that web of support that they'd built up suddenly fell away. And much, much more needs to be done to support people who are caring, who may have been caring for many years, but also to support those who are new to caring and struggling for the first time. And because of the pressures on the NHS and social care services, a lot of that pressure is being transferred to families and friends who are sometimes just not equipped to do everything that is being asked of them. I want to touch now on the issue of poverty, and to start really by a look back to 1994, because we were getting a success story about declining numbers of older people in poverty. And as you can see from that chart, it was going down and less older people experiencing poverty, but it's on the rise again. And this is deeply concerning. You will also see that the older people most likely to be in poverty are single women. And with, as we know, the increase in the state pension age, in all the issues about access to state pension, in the difficulties, as we've seen, of getting work or staying in work if you're an older person, there's a real risk here that poverty amongst older people increases. And part of what we need to do is to make sure that people who are entitled to benefits such as pension credit receive that benefit. Over £200 million that should be in the pockets of older people in Wales is not claimed. So we need to do all we can to redouble our efforts to make sure people get the benefits to which they're entitled. And we know recently, don't we, of the rises in energy costs, of the difficulty in the energy market, and already 67,000 older people are in fuel poverty. And there's a risk that that rises if no action is taken. I want to turn now to some of the more positive findings from our work. And this is, to start with, around intergenerational solidarity, the connections that we have across the ages that are benefiting all of us. And during the first lockdown, 24% of people reported they made new connections with different age groups in their local community. And many of those thought those relationships would continue. And that's something to build on. We know that one of the ways to tackle ageism, one of the ways to tackle stereotypes between generations, is to bring people together. So as we come through this pandemic and as we're able to regain some of our normal life, we need to make sure that those opportunities to bring generations together are not lost. And one of the quotes that struck me from our Winter Stories report was from Frances, who talked about what it was like not seeing children around anymore. And she just said, "I'm sad not to see children and younger people and children around. And this makes me wonder, how are they all doing?" And we've all had that experience of being cut off from people during lockdown. So it's so important we come together as we come, hopefully, out the other side. And I also want to touch on this sense of community and optimism that's there. 73% of people over the age of 65 say they have a sense of community, compared to just 56% of 16 to 44-year-olds. And that's a really strong finding, and we need to hold on to that. So one of the pieces of work I'm doing is working with local authorities and others to develop age-friendly communities, to make sure that there are no barriers to people of any age getting out and about, doing things that matter to them. And I'm pleased to say more and more local authorities are now joining that work. And that's given us an opportunity to build on this sense of community. And really positively, 80% of older people that I surveyed said they were positive about the future. So how can we harness that feeling of positivity, make sure that we can go forward together, meeting the challenges that we've outlined, the very real challenges that we face, the very urgent action that is needed, but also doing so with a sense of optimism and hope and building on that coming together that we've seen. So as I go forward and work with my team, we'll be wanting to build a future where older people are valued, where rights are upheld, and no one is left behind. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Helena. Mae yna gyfle rwan I ofyn cwestiynau penodol ar hyn da chi wedi clywed, ar hyn sydd yn yr adroddiad, a gofyn nhw'n uniongyrchol i'r Comisiynydd. Dwi'n sylweddoli bod yna rei ohonoch wedi bod yn gofyn cwestiynau yn y chat, a ambell un wedi gofyn cwestiynau yn y botwm Q&A. Felly, yr hyn dwi am wneud ydy gwahodd Helena yn ôl i'r sgrin I atab rhai o'ch cwestiynau chi, ac os oes gennych chi gwestiynau eraill, byddwch chi mor garedig a'i rhoi nhw yn y botwm cwestiwn ag atab. Diolch yn fawr. Helena, I'd like to invite you back to answer a number of questions that have appeared in the question and answer button, and I've invited others to ask the questions as well.
Diolch, George. Thank you. Thank you for the questions that are coming in. And I want to start by this issue of technology. So someone has said that you've mentioned issues about connecting through technology. How have you engaged with older people who can't use their technology to hear their voices and experiences? So the first thing I want to say is a particular hello and welcome to people in Newport, Flintshire, Pembrokeshire, Gwynedd and Anglesey who are actually joining us in group sessions. So the local authority and other organisations there have enabled people to come together who can't access the internet, but to come together in community settings to join us today. So that's a great example of what we're learning to do in terms of hybrid working and bringing together people online and offline. One of the things I've been very keen to do throughout all of this is to make sure that older people can continue to contact us in the way that suits them best. So we've continued to run our telephone advice and assistance service, helping many hundreds of older people over the last 18 months or so, and also making sure that we can still answer letters, send things out in paper copy, and do all those sorts of things. But it has been difficult, actually, and I know that many older people have embraced technology for the first time, and that's great. And I've certainly enjoyed being able to get to know people across Wales through Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all those things we'd never heard of 18 months ago. But I'm keen to make sure that we continue to give every opportunity for older people to contact me in other ways. And as the pandemic eases, and hopefully as things become safer, I'll be looking forward to getting back on the road again and meeting people directly. So thank you for that question. The next question I have is about home care, and it says, working in home care isn't deemed valuable enough and pay is not enough, especially with increased costs of living. I completely agree. For many, many years now, society generally, I don't think, has valued care enough, whether that's care that you do in your paid work, home care, domiciliary care, working in a care home, or unpaid care that you provide to family and friends. And actually, care is a universal thing. All of us at some time in our lives will either need care or be providing it for others. So why is it that this universal experience, this universal need, has been for so long undervalued, underpaid, not given the status and recognition? I hope that this pandemic is a turning point, that here in Wales and elsewhere, action is taken to fully recognise the skilled profession that home care, domiciliary care, working in a care home is, that along with that recognition gets proper pay that rewards that work, that gets training and support, and also status that's on a par with the NHS. That's what we need here in Wales. And I know that Welsh Government are taking steps now to increase the wages of people in care. And that's a particularly important step forward. But we do need to make sure that collectively we do more to recognise and reward and support people working in home care. There is a workforce crisis at the moment. There are not enough people going into care professions. So how can we help encourage people of all ages to do that and to know that they are going into a rewarding job that society values highly? I've got another couple of questions that have just come in. So the next one is about intergenerational work, which I touched on. And it says, do you feel that intergenerational models like home share, where younger people live together with older people who require companionship, can help to reduce loneliness? So I'm going to come to this question, and I'm going to bring one of the members of the panel in and introduce them in a moment as well. So I think intergenerational models are really important. So home share, where younger people live with older people, is a really good example of that. And there are many such examples. And here in Wales, it's great to see that we have a cross-party group led by Dennis Jewell that brings together people across the political parties and experts in intergenerational activity across the generations to really try and drive forward developments and strategies. And particularly on International Day of Older Persons, I think it's important to be celebrating not just older people, but people across the generation. So I do feel that they have got a really big role to play. So I could see that one of the panel had an electronic hand up. So I'm just going to bring in and welcome Altaf Hussain to join me as I finish off some of these questions. So Altaf is the Welsh Conservative Shadow Minister for Equalities and the Deputy Whip. And Altaf, I just want to invite you to make any comments on the questions that have come in so far.
Oh, thank you very much. You were great, and your presentation has been excellent. And I did go through the reports. I'll be very much interested in reading the winter stories, and I didn't get the access to it, but it will be eye-opener. You see, my problem is that in the UK, we have the Equalities Act 2010, and it does say that people are protected from discrimination by describing people under what is known as protected characteristics. The Equality Act recognizes 9 protected characteristics. And number 1 comes the age. So what I'm working at present is also do our elder population know their rights? So this is very important, that I think at the time when somebody comes to the age of pension, state pension, which is uniform among all of us. And at that time, they need to have that booklet or something, that these are your rights, and they need to know, because what you described is heartbreaking, really, and it is sad how people are using them and abusing them, and so much discrimination, lonely, then the poverty among elderly population. It is pathetic, really, and I know my heart goes out for them, and it is. But pandemic has, brought this all up, and we're lucky also to see where we are, in the sense that it has helped us to come together and look into these, which were not known before. And so I'm very grateful, as you described, very eloquently, and thank you very much for this. I'll be looking forward to work with you.
Thank you, Altaf, and thank you for talking about the Equality Act. You're absolutely right. Age discrimination, is illegal, And yet we know that ageism and age discrimination exists. One of the pieces of work we're doing here is working with TUC Cymru on a toolkit about older workers to make sure that organisations and employers have the right things in place so that they can support older workers, but also challenge age discrimination. So I think we just need to redouble some of our efforts on that. And your point about rights is really well made. Work that we've done show that many older people don't know the rights that they have. And it's very difficult to exercise your rights or to challenge things if you don't know what they are. So it's a big part of my role to promote older people's rights and to protect older people's rights. But I think we've all got a role in that. So I'm certainly looking forward to working with you, Altaf, on some of those things.
I want to make a last point, really. We have seen that I retired as orthopedic surgeon. And I tell you, when I was working, I never had a waiting list, so to say, because I would tackle that all. And this is sad. And if you look at the waiting list, again, this is elderly population. Are they doing it deliberately? That they are not tackling our population. You can do these hips and knee privately, but you cannot do it in the NHS. Same consultants working in the NHS, going privately, doing all these hips. And this is horrible. You know, this is shameful.
We've got a huge crisis there, really, isn't it, in terms of the length of time that people are having to wait for treatment. And we know that you can deteriorate during that time, but also the anxiety that you have if you don't know if you're going to get that treatment or that operation, you don't know how long you might need to wait. So there are a huge number of challenges ahead, undoubtedly. I'm going to move on now to a couple of other questions. And the next one is around the rise in the state pension age. So the question is, the rise in the state pension age for women particularly is often used on social media or in the news to promote an agenda about older people taking younger people's jobs. How can we tackle this? A very good question. The first thing to say is that older people are not taking younger people's jobs. So there is absolutely no evidence that that happens. It is a myth. As you saw from the data, older people contribute hugely to our economy. And actually during recessions, it tends to be older people that lose out and find it more difficult to get into work, not least because of age discrimination. We also know that we have job vacancies in key areas. We've talked about the problem in care, for example. So we need to make sure that older people have as good access to those jobs as others. So how do we tackle it? So one of the ways we can tackle it is by challenging it when we see it. So if you see on social media, or maybe on media more generally, where older people people are saying these sorts of things, I would just urge you to challenge it, to write in, to engage in debate, and to point out the facts of the situation. I'm also taking action as Commissioner to tackle the ageism that we see in the media. I produced a report from research from Leicester University quite recently, which looked at the stereotyping of older people and growing older in the print media. And it found that most stories about older people were negative. It talked about decline and burden, and they did not talk about the contribution that we make as we get older. So I'm now working with the National Union of Journalists, with Ofcom, and with the Independent Press Standards Organisation to try and strengthen the regulation so that we can challenge age discrimination when we see it in the media. And also working with the NUJ, thinking about how we can build on their very good code of practice, but do more around training and education of journalists as they come through so that their reporting can be accurate. So I think there is action that we can take, but we absolutely need to challenge it when we see it. So I hope I can count on your support to do that. I want to touch now on an issue that's come up, which is about transport. It says transport is a major issue for many older people. How can we develop services for those in greatest need, especially as many volunteer drivers are older people themselves? Well, you're absolutely right. Many volunteer drivers are older people. And of course, one of the things that happened because of the pandemic is that voluntary help wasn't there because older people were having to shield. We have a lot to do around transport, and I want to touch on two things. The first is making sure that our transport is age friendly. In other words, that you know that when you get onto public transport, you're going to feel safe, you're going to feel secure, and if you need help, that's going to be there. So a really practical example, we've probably all experienced at some point in our lives getting on a bus and the bus drives off before you've had a chance to sit down. But if you've got a mobility difficulty, that can be the difference between you feeling confident about getting on a bus or not. So we've done some work around age-friendly standards for public transport to make sure that those sorts of things, quite small things, not costly, are just in place all the time so that people are aware of making sure that transport can feel as safe as possible. But I want to talk about a specific issue as well, which is about transport to health services. Just before the pandemic started, we were concluding a major piece of work, which had been asking older people about their experiences of being able to get to health services. And we found that problems with transport were a major barrier. For example, people needed to get 3 or 4 buses to get to a hospital appointment at 8:30 in the morning, or people spending a huge amount of money they could ill afford to get a taxi to go there. Now, of course, with the pandemic, more of our medical appointments have been by the phone or online, but of course, we still need to make sure that you're able to get to your medical appointment if you can as easily as possible. So there's still work to do, and I've set out some actions that need to be taken to improve transport to health services in particular. So important questions come through about what efforts are being made to ensure Welsh-speaking older people are not being left behind in view of low numbers of Welsh-speaking care staff. So this is an issue I cover in the State of the Nation report, and looking at the importance of older people being able to speak in Welsh, particularly if talking with health and care services. And we know, for example, that many people living with dementia can revert to their first language of Welsh when they go through dementia. And it is important that you're then able to be able to talk in the language of your choice, particularly to people who are providing personal care or talking to you about intimate health issues. So there's still more work I think needs to be done to make sure that we have more Welsh-speaking care staff and NHS staff. And there was a very important and very powerful report that the Alzheimer's Society and Welsh Language Commissioner reported on in 2018, which I would recommend looking at because it sets out very clearly some of the issues and the challenges and what needs to happen. And I think this is a really important part of the overall ambition of having 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050 that needs to include people across all professions. And I think a particular focus actually in terms of our health and care staff. So I think I'm coming to the end of questions now. I'm just going to take one more question now, and then we're going to go into our panel discussion. We're going to join Altaf and others and discuss the report in more detail. I'm going to be inviting them to give some comments, and then you'll have a further opportunity not just to ask questions of me, but to ask questions of the members of the Senedd as well. So the final question I'm touching on is what can be done to improve older people's access to healthcare, particularly GP appointments. So we saw from the report that more older people were struggling to get GP appointments face-to-face. People were finding it difficult dealing, in some cases, dealing with triage, and in some cases, dealing with online appointments. This is not a problem that is unique to Wales. It's happening in many parts of the UK. And part of the reason is because GPs are dealing with more and more demands and more pressures. So I think there are two things. One is to think about the issues that people are coming forward with and making sure that if those issues and problems can be dealt with by other members of the health service, that they are. So whether that's physiotherapists or opticians or nurses, so making sure it's the whole health team. And any of you that have been dealing with primary care recently will know that that's the experience that you get, that you talk with other members of the health care team. And that's a really important part of understanding the whole picture. But we also need to make sure that as we go through the pandemic, we take the learning from this. And the part of that learning is the importance of having enough GPs and the importance of investing in care that is local and care that is there in your local community. And one of the issues that older people raise with me a lot is about continuity of care. It can be really exhausting, can't it, if you have to keep repeating your story to lots and lots of different people, to keep repeating what you're going through. So that continuity of care, making sure that older people have a key point of contact, whether that's within our NHS or indeed within social care, so they feel, and we feel, that someone understands our health and care situation and can be that trusted person to go to. So that ongoing monitoring is happening, I think, is incredibly important. When care is fragmented, when you feel that people don't really understand your situation, that's when you can lose confidence. So it is a challenging time, but there are things that can be done in terms of responding to that issue of continuity of care, the importance of good communication when you're waiting for care, and as far as possible, better integration between our health and care services as well. So that's enough from me for a moment or two, I think. Thank you so much for your questions. We're going to keep them coming in. We're going to see if we can come to some more questions as we go forward. But we're going to start the panel debate now. And we're going to be joined by 3 members of the Senedd. And a huge thank you to them for making time today. So you've already met Altaf, and I'm going to come back to you, Altaf, in a moment for any further thoughts that you have on the report, and also anything that you want to say about the policy of Welsh Conservatives on these issues. I'm also going to be introducing John Griffiths from the Labour Party, who's the chair of the Local Government and Housing Committee in the Senedd, and Pereda Owen Griffiths, who's the Plaid Cymru spokesperson for communities and older people. So welcome all. Altaf, can I come to you first, please? Just again, any further remarks that you want to make, and indeed anything that you.
I think your report has been great, and I like that age discrimination should not be there, and we want to end ageism. That is, in conclusion, you're saying, and that is fantastic. We want to stop the abuse of these elderly population. Now, you touched very important point, that is GP face-to-face appointments. You see, elderly population, after aging, you have a lot of ailments. You cannot go to GP for one ailment, which used to be a practice before that. You have to speak only about one symptom or one sign. Now, I don't know what that was and how they were diagnosing these patients, what they were suffering from. I think we have seen in this pandemic that nurses and the care workers are at the forefront of NHS. Whereas the doctors, they are a little bit back, except when you go into the A&E department where you see them. Now, I think we should start asking general practitioners to see patients. They have time. We don't want that they should stop seeing patients virtually. No, with that, they should continue to have face-to-face appointments, at least for elderly population, because they have a lot of ailments. And I liked your, what you said, the continuation of care. Personally, I have 3 things in this. Number 1 is that patient should be seen as a whole, not for one symptom, because the body is interrelated. You may have a symptom, but you may have something else in the body which probably is giving him that symptom. So unless and until you examine the patient fully, you won't come to the diagnosis. So see patient as a whole, whosoever, whether he's a consultant, whether he's a GP, whether any doctor who is working in NHS has a, it is, he has to do it. Number 2, once they see the patient, prioritize the treatment. We don't want to have him 3-4 treatments at the same time. That is why they see doctor. There may be interlinked, few things, but that prioritization of treatment is very important. And then 3rd comes the continuation of care, which has to be, as you rightly pointed out, there should be somebody You know, previously we used to always have a consultant in the hospital would be in charge of that patient, and whatever he would go through, he had that point of contact, consultant, secretary. It has gone. Now you don't know who you are seeing. I personally, when I visit people, I don't know who will be seeing me. So we need to get that grandeur of our NHS back. And this pandemic has helped us because it has slowed us down. So we have to open up now again, and we can't stop. We have to be healthy. We have to face this all, and we have to move forward with dignity and with your rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think move forward with dignity and rights it's a great call. I completely agree with you about seeing people as a whole and not just as a symptom. I remember one older person saying to me, we are not just a collection of symptoms. You need to see us as a whole and our whole story and who we are, because that's the only way to get effective treatment. And thank you for drawing on your experience as a surgeon as well. It's great to get your insights from someone who's been such a part of the NHS for so long. So I'm going to come next. I'm just changing the order slightly of our speakers. So I'm going to come next to Peredo and Griffiths. It's great to see you again. So Peredo is the Plaid Cymru spokesperson for communities and older people. I'm just going to invite you to make a few remarks about our State of the Nation report. Thank you.
Good morning, bore da. Sorry, I'm a little bit late arriving. I'm rushing from one meeting to another, but without moving from my seat, as a lot of us have been doing over the last few months and well, a year and a half indeed. And it's great to be with you this morning, talking about this important report and what it has to say to the way that we move things forward in Wales. I was actually at bingo last night. I was with Rasa OAP Welfare Association, and we were playing bingo, and it was lovely to be back in a room with a fun bunch of people, and I got a line, so I did win a little bit. So, but I remember my nine. She loved going to bingo, and from what my dad used to tell me, that it was the only time she'd do something for herself because she had 6 kids. So she that was the only night of the week that she would be able to go and do something that she wanted to do. And I think what we've been doing over the last 18 months, I think what would she have thought of this pandemic? You know, we've lost a few years now, but what would she have thought of this pandemic? Chances are she would have just got on with it, because that's what most people have done. But like in the report, we've read that she would probably have been lonely and wishing she probably could go to a bingo session and to meet up with people. And over the last week or so, I was doing a little bit of reading, and I came across a quote from Mother Teresa, and it really struck a chord with me. And it said, "Loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted is the most terrible poverty." And I'm sure over the last 18 months, a lot of us can identify with that statement. You know, this report talks about some of that poverty in terms of access to services, the deterioration of physical and mental health, the financial impacts of the pandemic on older people. It also talks about some of the abuse suffered at the hand of scam artists, and many have not felt that they are part of society. And a lot of those are really strong emotional things that we should really be looking at, and how do we learn from that. But the things that were in there that heartened me as well: older people are resilient, they're resourceful, they're determined, and they have a wealth of experience to fall back on. And it was great to hear that 80% of people surveyed by the Commissioner were optimistic about the future. And that's a testament to older people in our society. So whether we're closer to the age of top of the shop or closer to legs 11, we need to take note of this report and use its findings to build a better, inclusive and more optimistic future for Wales. and where our older people can continue to be part of the lives and contribute to the lives of our communities. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Diolch, and thank you very much both for those sort of personal experiences, and I'm incredibly impressed by your knowledge of bingo, and also that you won. I don't think I've ever won a line in bingo. I'm much too slow, so you're ahead of me there, Pereda. But I think what you talked about there around the loneliness and the impact of that, and I think that's what struck me from the report actually, is it was about being consistently lonely, that it becomes a state of the state that one's in all the time, and I think that's incredibly damaging and difficult. And I just wonder, Pereda, whether you have any thoughts about how we can combat loneliness in our communities. What can be done to reach out to older people, particularly now, actually, given everything that people have gone through?
I think what we've found over the last 18 months is that community exists. I think we'd lost maybe the sense of community in certain parts of Wales, and it's how do we nurture those green shoots of reviving our communities and getting our communities to function better, to empower our communities to look after our most vulnerable. How do we make things safe for older people and people in general? And I think that safeness element of how do we make people feel comfortable in coming back in an environment where we might well have been frightened of the effects of COVID and the effects that it might have on us. But I think by improving some of that fundamental services that we have to make sure that public transport is fit for purpose, so that people can get around, so that we make sure that carers are looked after, and that the unpaid carers are recognised, and that unpaid carers actually recognise that they are carers, and that the support that is there, so that it builds up these, like I was yesterday in a room, socially distanced, but also fun, bringing that back and bringing people together so that we can actually talk and engage with people, and rather than just going to the shop and back, or just going to the doctors and back, or whatever that might be, that we're actually supporting those really good volunteers and things in our society that really support people and alleviate some of that loneliness.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Pereda. Altaf, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I would love to work with you on this really, because I have certain ideas about it. Those ideas were generated when I was doing orthopedic, doing hips and knees. And so in that, what I have seen in those days, MRSA was a horrible, infection. We were unable to control that. And then we did a lot of survey. And so it came to that I wanted to do a home assessment at a given age. That age I thought is constant, as we were talking about the pension age, state pension. Everybody, has that state pension. And that time, if we do the assessment of a person in home and see what problems he has, see what he is suffering from, it will be a sort of, document which can be filled up by, say, a social care worker, who may spend their hour or two, which comes to some cost. But then if you see these people, if they go into the hospital and stay there on an extra day, it was going to save roughly about 20 million a year. So this is something really I need that. I think we can work it together, and it will be fantastic, because we will be knowing by that assessment when that gentleman is going into the hospital, Who is going to look after him when he comes out? Where is he going to? So it is all documented in that, and that becomes like a MOT, for that gentleman at the age when he is retiring, and he has MOT for the 30 years, 40 years. So I think we'll talk about that.
Good. We've got some cross-party work going on already. That's fantastic. And I really like that idea of that sort of that health check, that MOT, and that continuity of care. I think that's a really strong point. We've got a couple of questions that have come in about the pressure on unpaid carers, and Pereda, you were talking about that, and I wondered, Altaf, if you have any thoughts particularly on how we can help unpaid carers, so people who are caring for loved ones who we know have been particularly struggling over the last 18 months.
Again, at that age, when you get the state pension and you are moving around, everybody, people are knowing you are in your own environment. And what I have seen as an orthopedic surgeon, that there are many people who live in second story, third story, they can't go. So all those things will be assessed and written down, and we will be telling them, or the social services will tell them at what stage they will need whatever help they can ask for, and they'll be told about their rights, about their who to contact, when and where. Because I have seen many population, elderly population, the help is there, but they don't know how to get it. Because they don't know about it. So I think, I was a trustee for Age Cymru, Swansea Bay, which closed, and I think, I don't know what happened to that. But they were doing a lot of good job, but those were fragmented. It doesn't come to that, as I say, a fixed stage. He gets state pension. At the same time, he gets that book, and you tell him, because that age, he is able to understand what his rights are, what he needs to do if there is any problem. And carer, again, it comes to knowing about their whoever is looking after them, or whether they need a state care. It will be all documented at that time for when he is that MOT.
Thank you, Altaf. And I know one of the challenges in caring is that you often don't think of yourself as a carer, and it can take you many years to realise. You think your daughter helping your parents, or a partner helping a loved one, and if you don't recognise yourself as a carer, you're not going to know that help is there for you. So there's a big kind of campaign we need, I think, really about raising that awareness, and also more to do, I think, in terms of then people being able to get the services they need easily. One of the shocking bits of data in the report showed the number of, huge number of carers in Wales, but very few actually going through a carer's assessment, and then very few actually getting a support plan as a result. So there's something not working there, isn't there? There's something.
We can include that as well into this, MOT.
Yeah, something needs to shift.
Yeah.
Did you want to come in on the issue of carers at all?
Yes, well, I touched on carers earlier, and that unpaid carers don't necessarily see themselves as carers, and I think that's one element. I think we as a party, like Plaid Cymru, have always for the last decade or so called for a health and social care system free at the point of need. So it's take that health and social care element, so that there's no worry there about who's going to pay for the care. So that there's that is something that we're calling on, and touching on. There's a couple of points in the comments that are saying loneliness is a bigger complex issue than can be helped with a bingo session. We need that social care element, that people know what's there, that can access it, that they know that it's there for them to be able to tap into and to support older people and people in general. But I think the health assessments and the collection of data, we're talking in a debate on dementia this week, and accurate data is one of the things that we really need to be able to inform this conversation and to make sure that we see where the gaps are so that we can fill those gaps, that we can inform the way that the pathways work. I think with going back to loneliness and those elements of social care that we need to really sort out and make sure that those unpaid carers are linked in to what's there from a service provision, so that they know that it's there. They know that, because they think that they are caring for mum or dad, so it's not a job. It's not. I'm not a carer. I'm doing what I'm doing. It's a labour of love. It's something that I need to be doing. But we need to get maybe some of the stigma maybe off that carer's title, if you like, and work better, so that we actually that we inform people of what they're able to get in the system.
Thank you both. Yeah, and I think it's an area where we need such a shift, don't we? Really, we need to recognise that, as I said, all of us are going to either be providing care to someone or needing that ourselves. So we have to view this as a universal need, and therefore a universal approach, and something that is significantly different, I think, from the current situation. I'm really pleased now to welcome John Griffiths, who's joined us. John is the chair of the Local Government and Housing Committee, and as is the way at the moment, has just sort of joined us from another meeting, but I'm delighted to have you with us, John. And just wanted to give you an opportunity really to give your reflections on the State of the Nation report, or indeed anything that you've heard in terms of questions and debate. So over to you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Elaine. And I'm sorry I'm a little late. As you say, chairing the Local Government and Housing Committee, I had to attend what we call a Chairs Forum meeting in the Senate, which brings the chairs of all the committees together. But it's great to be with you. And of course, quite a number of years back, when I was a minister in Welsh Government with responsibility for older people, I took through the measures at that time to create the post of Older People's Commissioner. And I'm very pleased that I was able to do that, because I think it's really important that we have that strong voice here in Wales for older people, because there are so many issues that need to be addressed and need to be championed. I think during the pandemic, as with many other aspects of life, it's brought to the fore the issues for older people in accessing public services, as the report shows. As people have said, loneliness is such a massive issue, and just that ability for older people to play a full part in society, whether that's volunteering or just being part of their society, getting out and about as they normally would. So it's been really, really difficult for everyone, obviously, during the pandemic, but perhaps there have been particular difficulties for older people. And I think the report, makes that clear. We get lots and lots of complaints that people aren't able to access those face-to-face appointments with GPs as they would like to, that they can get through on the telephone lines. We know about all the issues that the health service are going to be facing through the winter and beyond, with the pandemic continuing, with worries about flu, with the backlog of treatments that have built up, the difficulties around A&E in terms of being able to discharge people because of lack of domiciliary care packages and lack of care home places. It's a really worrying mix of pressures. And, obviously older people are very concerned about this, because as you get older, you tend to have more health issues, and you tend to access these services to a greater extent. So, it's a huge task for government, working with partners to try and get to grips with these issues and address them effectively. And it really matters to older people. But beyond that, there are, those wider issues about playing a full part in society and, coming through the pandemic, getting out and about more. Certainly from my post bag, I found that a lot of older people appreciated the Welsh Government's more cautious approach to the pandemic. But, now they want to get back to some level of normality as quickly and as strongly as we can. And, there are massive issues there that older people are concerned with that affect society generally as well. And I think, just understanding that, is so important. That's why the State of the Nation report, does bear reading and studying, I think, Helena, as we look at engaging with government at different levels and organisations, that have key roles in delivering those public services. But what's really positive, I think, is to hear that a lot of older people are still optimistic, because, I think, in my experience, older people are strong in character very often. They've got that life experience behind them, haven't they? They've seen a lot of things. They've had a lot of difficulties, perhaps a lot of mixed experiences. They're key to their families in terms of sharing that lifetime experience, caring responsibilities and so on. And it's great to hear that they're optimistic. They are resilient. And that's so important in these times. So I think that gives us cause for some optimism. But, I am just so pleased that we have an Older People's Commissioner, and that office to take up these issues for older people, to be a strong voice for older people. And obviously today is an important part of that.
John, thank you, and a personal thank you for your role in setting up the Commissioner post as well. I'm struck by what you said about optimism. There's a lovely phrase which is now is the time for optimism. We leave pessimism to better times. So sometimes it's a time when things are really, really difficult, that actually you need to try and kind of, look to the horizon a bit as well. And I think I would echo what you've said about the resilience of older people. And, a lot of older people have talked to me about the way in which they were portrayed, particularly early on in the pandemic. If you remember, everyone over 70 was suddenly classed as vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And actually that did a great disservice, I think, to our older population. And I think we need to rebalance this to talk more about how we are all valued as we get older. And we all have vulnerabilities, whatever our age, and goodness, the pandemic has shown that. But the resilience has been extraordinary, I think, the resilience of older people in the most desperate of times. So I'm going to just come to another couple of questions now, and it picks up, John, if I might come back to you to start with, because it picks up something about what you were saying about getting out and about again. It said many older people's groups are reluctant to meet because of concerns about COVID infection, but this will have a negative impact on people's physical and mental health. How can we encourage more older people to meet together safely? Any thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, I think one thing we have to do is to ensure that if we are asking older people, to attend events or offering opportunities for them to do so, it's clear that safety has been seriously considered and appropriate measures taken. So I think, that's what gives confidence, I think, isn't it? The proper risk assessments have happened and measures put in place accordingly. But there's a general messaging role here, I think, for all of us, isn't there? To try and be part of that return to life more closely resembling what we knew before the pandemic. We do have to live with COVID-19, we all know that, it's often said, and we just have to get on with doing that. We're in that transition phase at the moment, aren't we, I think? No doubt next year we'll have an annual vaccination round for COVID-19, just as we do with flu. But in the meantime, we have to give confidence, I think, that proper safety measures are in place. It's still hear a lot of people, complaining that a number of people, too many people are too relaxed now and, acting as if it's all over when we know that it isn't. Whether that's not wearing a mask when they should be wearing a mask or not keeping a social distance when they should be. So, you know, government, all of us, I think, have a role in trying to make that clear that, you know, if people are to have confidence to return to life as they once knew it, then people have a responsibility to do what they should be doing. And, you know, we have issues around enforcement that we have to look at on that as well. But I think, you know, outside of those sort of more practical issues, we all have to get on that more optimistic front, I think, Elena, and say that, yes, we do have to live with it. We are going to live with it, and get those messages over to people that they have to be part of that return to, you know, to a more normal life, as it were.
And I guess in that, we just need to make sure that there aren't any barriers for all the people in doing that. And one of those barriers we know is digital. So, you know, we've seen quite a few examples over the last few months about, you know, just an assumption that people have got smartphones that they can use, or an assumption that people can go online. And we know that many older people are not online. We also know across the ages, actually across the whole age spectrum, if you're, you know, if you're in poverty, you're much less likely to have access to decent Wi-Fi or to smartphones. And I'm interested in the extent to which we've almost got a growing digital divide that's increasing inequalities in our population because of this big push to digital, without maybe enough effort being made sure that if you're not online, there are other ways in which you can get services, or enough being done to make sure that you can access digital technology. So if I can come to you, John, first, and then to Peredo and Altaf on this issue of digital inclusion, what's being done about it, what can be done about it? John.
Yeah, I think, you know, there are a lot of people who are very good with the new technologies, Helena, and we should recognise that, shouldn't we? That, you know, I see older people all the time using the new technologies and, you know, being part of that that switch that we see in the modern age. But yeah, there will be particular challenges, I think, for service providers, you know, to make sure that where people haven't got the technology they might have, or they haven't got the knowledge that they might have, that you know, you can still access services in traditional ways. So it's part of that person-centered approach, I think, that we hear so much about, isn't it? That, you know, services should be shaped around the needs of the individual rather than expecting the individual to meet the needs of the service. So I know Welsh Government are very keen on that, and you know, it is a message that has got across, I think, to service providers. So, you know, I would expect that to be the case, and, you know, where it's not the case, we need to highlight it, and we need to make sure that the necessary adjustments are made. We are, again, in a, you know, in a transition, aren't we? And I think one of the problems is the pace of change is so rapid. And there's only so much change that human beings, you know, of any age really can comfortably cope with. And we, you know, we have to have a mind to that when it comes to the digital age. You have to take people with you. And, you know, there has to be a transition, and you can't expect people to be up to speed with everything all at once, you know. So that's the big challenge for service providers, I think. But I know Welsh Government are, you know, are very aware of these matters and trying to work with all the key agencies and services in Wales to make sure that, you know, the balance is correctly struck.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Peredo.
Yeah, I think digital exclusion happens, and it doesn't really necessarily happen just in older people. It can be all across the board. But, you know, personal experiences. Chapel on a Sunday, we've got one lady who's 92 that has joined every single Zoom meeting, and is extremely determined to be there, even though, you know, 2 or 3 strokes later she's still going. But then younger members really struggle to get to grips with digital technology. Some of the things that John was saying there about services. You know, I've been talking to people up in Ebervale in particular last week, talking about the Flexibus service and the use of the app. Well, a lot of people on the high street are saying, well, we really struggle to use the app. and the phone system isn't brilliant. So really concerns about the implementation. I think the idea works really well. The implementation and the actual practical on the ground doesn't necessarily mirror that. And talking to the police again, you know, in Gwent, that they're saying that a lot of the newer members of the police coming through, is a lot of it is training around digital crime, and that, and in your report, I think it was something like 64% of people had been targeted for some form of crime, and a lot of that probably would be along the lines of online fraud and online trickery and that. So again, a little bit of what John was saying is we need to make sure that the robustness of the systems that are in place, and that there's alternatives there for people who aren't digitally engaged as much, and work through those elements really.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who's putting some really useful comments on the chat as well, around some good examples of projects that are happening, and also that issue of cost of internet access as well. Altaf, anything that you'd like to add on this one?
Yes, thank you very much. You know, on one side, we don't talk about their rights, but on the other side, we'll talk about something which is not anybody's right to have this digital, and we say, oh no, we need to have this. I think you have very rightly shown that 23% population of elderly population could only you know, see the GP appointments and or the health, whatever they are getting. So it's a huge thing really, that 75% people don't know what's happening. And when the technology, although in worldwide where we are, and we have also areas in Wales where there's no broadband, where there's no digital connections, and you can see there are, you know, problems. I think we have to take it very slowly, especially with the age, where we are saying that a person may have a dementia. Now, who has a dementia? I don't know, unless you diagnose them safely. So by the age when they are coming to the group, when we call them elderly population, I think they need to have every facility which they should have proper access to, which they understand, and which they are able to look after, and look after themselves, and look after the carers. I know mental health is an issue. There are so many issues, but these are, I think, right issues, that digital technology, unless and until, you know, we are being cheated in our offices. Our children are being cheated by these digital, whatever they provide, not to talk of elderly population. Their phone remains online, and they will have to pay £2,000-3,000 every month for that. Yes. So I don't think this is right. We need to really make it foolproof. Yeah. And it should be a law for those who are providing it. It should be a law for the health, that they are providing the, you know, there are alternatives for them.
Thank you. Thanks, Altaf, and all of you for your comments on digital. Just in the chat, there's a really, I love this, a really good bit of practical advice being shared about getting your COVID passport at the telephone number and how to do that. So I think that was Penny. Thank you, Penny. So anyone got a question about COVID passports, it's in the chat about how to access that. Just in terms of the work I'm doing, I'm pleased that, in fact, my colleague George, who you saw earlier, is a member of the Digital Inclusion Alliance here in Wales. So we're working with others on that, and we will be producing information for older people and their rights to information services in a digital age. So that will be coming out over the next few weeks or so, as well as guidance to local authorities and health boards. So it's a key issue, I think, because as I said, this is an area where people could get left behind if we're not careful. So we've got about 6 or 7 minutes left, I think, by my watch. So those of you who, if we've not been able to come to your question yet, Do put other things in the chat. We can always get back to you after the event if there's specifics that you want to raise. And thank you, those of you who've been putting it in the chat, some really helpful information, which we will look at as well. And a reminder also from Steve in the chat that the Welsh Government's strategy for an ageing society is going to be published next week. So do look out for that, because that will deal with quite a lot of the issues that we've been talking about and raising today. Welsh Government and partners will be working on its implementation plan as well. So a really critical time, actually, to see if that strategy really deals with these issues and challenges that we've been facing. Now, I think I warned the panelists that I would be coming round at the end of the session just to ask you for any final comments or remarks. But maybe, is there other one or two things that you might do or you think your parties might do in response to this report? That would be really good to hear. So any particular action or thing that you might want to take forward, and any closing comments that you would like to make. So I'm going to come to Altaf, then Pereda, then John. So Altaf, may I come to you first?
Thank you very much. You see, it's an eye-opener, this report, what you have come up with, and your presentation. So we need to work together. Cross-party means really apolitical. We need to come together and see what's best for us all. It's not that you, me, or somebody. It is us, and we have to have that right, and we have to move forward with that and see to it that our elderly population doesn't suffer.
Thank you, Altaf. A very clear commitment to cross-party working together, and this being about us. Thank you, Pereda.
I think one of the biggest things that we can do is help intergenerational work, so that we tap into the life experience of older people and help to guide our society through this post-pandemic world, and to really get to grips with the thing that you've got behind you there, Helena. Cydweithio I wneud Cymru'n y lle gorau yn y byd I heneiddio, and that should be our aim. Diolch.
Thank you very much, Pereda, and thanks for your eagle eyes on my backdrop as well. Thank you, John.
Helena, I'm sure the Welsh Government will be carefully considering your State of the Nation report for 2021, because we hear all the time that Welsh Government wants to be evidence-based, in the decisions that it makes around strategy and policy and implementation. And, this is a report that has research and evidence collated, brought together and presented, which is very, very useful for government, but also for all the key service providers. So, I think it's a very useful exercise. I think we can look forward with some optimism, as, older people have in your report, because, I can remember, as I say, when we were taking through the measures to create the Office of Older People's Commissioner, that we talked about, it's not just about adding years to life, but adding life to years. And, it's actually a very positive picture when we look at aging. I know there have been some setbacks recently in terms of increasing life expectancy that, we need to think hard about. But generally, people have been living longer over recent times and living better. People have had better quality of life as well as longer life. So, it's hugely positive, really. And as we come through the pandemic, what we know is that what worked during the pandemic was people and communities pulling together. That's what got us through, the very difficult early days. And it's what's got us to this stage where, hopefully we're able to emerge and get back to a better life. But older people will be and, have been and will be a crucial part of that. We need to all pull together, use the talents and abilities of everyone in Wales. And obviously that very much includes older people. So I hope we do get back to that, living a fuller life again, and older people are at the very heart of it.
Thank you, John, Altaf and Pereda, for your time and contributions today. And thank you everyone who's been putting questions in, putting things in the chat and engaging. It's good to have so many of you with us today. I hope you enjoy reading the report, the State of the Nation report, and Winter Stories that we've published today at the same time. And my thanks again to all those older people who shared their stories with us, not just actually for Winter Stories, but throughout the last 18 months. I just want to reflect that today across the world, many people are celebrating International Day of Older Persons and holding events. So this is a time where globally we're celebrating growing older, celebrating older people and the contributions older people make to our society. And we know that we are also still in the midst of a global pandemic where older people's rights have been threatened, where there have been extremely difficult challenges for many people. So we have a big challenge ahead of us, but I think the State of the Nation report shows some of the strong foundations that we have to build on, not least older people's resilience and contribution, but also some of those long-seated problems that still remain that we need to tackle, issues of health inequalities, issues of better support needed for unpaid carers, issues of loneliness and isolation. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you on those issues and many more. Thank you again for joining us today and for all you are doing to champion older people and to work and advocate for our older citizens. I want to leave you with one of my favourite quotes, and forgive me for those of you who've heard it before, but it's from Nelson Mandela, and I think it encapsulates the spirit of our conversation today. And it's this: a society that does not value its older people denies its roots and endangers its future. And for all our futures, we need to make sure that we value older people and that we have a Wales where older people are valued, rights are upheld, and no one is left behind. So thank you again, and happy International Day of Older Persons. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much.